Through this last month of August, the preserving has continued. The bounty of summer crops is rolling in, and there is no time to waste. We have a lot of work to do, and we need to make sure we have enough food preserved for winter. Okay, freeze-dried peaches. We're putting them away, and Cam is taste testing.
Much crispier than I think you can achieve with a dehydrator. They are sweeter as well, because how the freeze drying works, it retains a lot more of that like immediate flavor, the sweetness, and so I'm a fan. I really like them. Becky, how long do I boil these for?
After they freeze, we could kind of like... So I have a lot of work cut out for me today here in the garden. First of all, I'm going to be harvesting all of my tomatoes that I have ripe right now. And then I'm also going to be doing some pruning. I'm going to string up more of the tomatoes and trellis. And I'm also going to weed in between the tomatoes and the rows. So a lot to do. I always feel behind this time of year just because I spend a lot of time in the kitchen just making sure we're making the most of our harvest, putting up everything that we work so hard to grow. Then when you get back out in the garden, you're like, oh, I'm really behind. So it's hard to keep up with it all, but I just do my best, and that's all you can do. It's getting dark, so I'm gonna head inside. I got about a bushel full of tomatoes picked, and I'm thinking I'll probably make spaghetti sauce with these because spaghetti sauce is one that takes a lot of tomatoes all at once. I still haven't picked all of the tomatoes on the plant, so I'll have to come back out tomorrow and keep picking. I also need to keep weeding and trellising and all of those things. We have been working on making our spaghetti sauce today, and the recipe that I'm using is called Spaghetti Sauce Without Meat. It comes from this book, the Amish Canning Cookbook. However, this recipe I found is almost identical to one you can find in the National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is available online. So I'm going to link you to that in the video description so you can get this recipe for free. This calls for pressure canning, so you need to have a pressure canner for it. And I like to make pressure can spaghetti sauce, especially because you don't have to add all the acid to it and alter a lot of the taste. One thing that I do differently than this recipe is this one says to put tomatoes, put them into boiling water, wait for the skins to split, and then boil them, and then you put them through a food mill. I don't do that. My preference is to oven roast them, and what I do for that is I just cut the tomatoes in half, put them on a baking tray, and then cook them at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour. And what that does is it will make it so the skins are easier to remove if you would like to. However, the sauce maker that I have, it removes the skins for me, so I don't have to do that. And also the seeds. The other nice thing about roasting them in the oven is that it takes out a lot of the water before they get into your pan. So you don't have to stand there and just stir and stir and stir for like 24 hours. It's not really that long, but it feels very long. Especially at the end, when it starts to get really thick, you really have to be right on top of stirring tomato sauce or paste or anything like that. I do still have to stir it at the end and cook everything together, but it's just a lot less time in the long run, even though it takes a little bit longer up front because I'm oven roasting everything, and it's kind of a slower process because I have to rotate through a bunch of trays. So I'm doing a double batch of the spaghetti sauce. So normally it takes 30 pounds of tomatoes. I was able to get 60 pounds of tomatoes to make this. We harvested all of our dried beans today. As you can see, it's not just the dried beans. We harvest the whole plant, pull the whole thing up, and then later on I take off the pods, and then even later than that I will shuck them.
I know, I need like
We harvested a lot of tomatoes and peppers, and to preserve those I decided that I wanted to make some chili. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make chili, and I'm going to freeze dry it instead of can it. And the reason I'm freeze drying it is because it gives me a lot more creativity over what I can do with the chili. When you can chili, you have to follow a recipe very exact. And with freeze drying, you don't have to do that, which is super nice. So it'll give me a little bit more creativity. It also, the freeze drying lasts longer and retains a lot more of the nutrients. So that's why I am freeze drying. The only thing that I'm going to do different than I would normally do with chili is normally I add in some beef broth, and even though I could totally freeze dry that, I'm not gonna add that in before I freeze dry it. And when it comes time to eat the chili and rehydrate it, I will just warm up beef broth on the stove and use that to rehydrate my freeze-dried chili instead. So we're gonna use some of our dried beans, some of our beef. We had a bull that we had butchered, and the meat is super duper lean, which lends itself really well to freeze drying, because when you freeze dry foods, you don't want anything high in fat. So having a very lean meat in there is good for this. So we're gonna use that beef that we have, and probably some of our frozen celery that I preserved earlier this year. I was going to freeze dry my celery, but I'm glad I didn't. I just stuck it in the freezer because I was gonna add it into things like canned foods and some of these other more ready-made meals that I am making right now. So the celery will get freeze dried, but just a little bit later on as I make these meals and freeze dry them. The ground beef's done, I got the onions in, I'm working on the garlic, but the kids just wrapped up the dried beans, shelling the dried beans. So I have a great big bowl of them. This is about 8 cups, and I just weighed them. It's 3.5 pounds. There are still a few beans in the bucket. So I'm thinking we got about 4 pounds from, it was a 30-foot-ish row, which is pretty good in my opinion. One of our better bean years. So I am gonna take these and I am going to do a quick soak of them, heat up the water, put them in the water for about an hour or so. While these are soaking, I will go ahead and chop up my peppers and then work on my tomatoes. I am going to skin the tomatoes instead of just chopping them and putting them in. I don't like skins in my chili. So I'm doing a triple batch of chili, going to save some for us right now. I was intending on it being for tonight for dinner, but it's already super late. It's 7 o'clock. I'm not gonna finish this till like 9 probably. It's gonna be late dinner. The kids have been snacking. So it's just kind of how it goes in the summer. Not as anticipated. Totally winging this recipe because it's so from scratch. Sometimes I look up recipes and use those. I have a recipe that I normally use, but this is too much from scratch. So I'm just making it up as I go, and I will share it with you guys if it's decent. the chili sit in our cold room overnight, so it's cold and ready to go into the freeze dryer or the freezer. I have 8 trays lined up for the freeze dryer. The freeze dryer comes with 4 trays, but I got an extra set of 4 trays for this purpose because I like to cook in bulk because it saves time. So now that I have all of this chili, I can put it all in the freeze dryer trays and have them all ready, even though I can only fit 4 at a time. For each tray, you can generally fit around 4 cups or a quart of liquid in a tray, so that's what I'm planning on for this. So total, it'll be 2 gallons worth of chili that I'll be able to fit, and it seems like I may even have more than that, so I may be doing more batches than just these. And I also have some tray lids, which make it really nice and a lot easier to stack these and just put them in my freezer while I wait for my first batch to finish. So I'm gonna stick these in the freezer, this batch in the freeze dryer, and then once that one finishes, I will put this one in. The chili is finished and we're putting half of it in jars and the other half we're gonna put in Mylar bags for long-term storage. Or maybe a little bit more because I'm gonna put in some additional. Today we are working on planting some more fall crops. This time I'm not direct sowing them, I'm planting them directly in soil block trays. And the kids have already made the trays for me, so all I need to do is put in the seeds and then cover it with some soil and let them grow. Some of our sunflower heads are ready for harvest, and I know that because when I start to see some seeds missing, that's when they're ready. If the birds are eating them, then they're good enough to feed to our birds. So we're gonna go and feed them to our chickens and try and get what's left. Last year I covered them all with row cover material and let them dry right there on the head. And this year I decided instead of doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and feed them to the chickens as they mature and try and catch them before the wild birds catch them. Just kind of skip that middle step. Does this go in or out?
Sunflowers! Your favorite! But Yay!